investing in the digital economy, and in particular the new Australian government's agenda for boosting productivity through the use of cloud services. I'm also going to talk about the actions the government is taking to enhance the adoption of cloud in the public sector and the broader economy among small business and also not-for-profit organisations. But first I'm going to talk about why the digital economy is seen as critical in Australia and fundamentally why we need to get the digital economy right. In Australia, productivity has been the focus of intense debate. When you look at the figures over the last 2 decades, you can see why. For many years, we played a slow but steady game of trying to catch up with the United States, which is acknowledged to be the world leaders in productivity, and we did particularly well in the last few years of the 1990s. However, from 2003 onwards, productivity in my country declined. Now, normally this would have flow-on impact to standards of living, gross income and so on. But this didn't happen in Australia, and the reason is that we had a mining boom, the longest and biggest in our history, and that was an important source of economic growth during this period, so it masked the decline in productivity that was going on. The bad news for Australia is that the so-called mining boom is not going to last forever. In order for Australia to maintain its standard of living, the country needs to look forward to new sources of growth and innovation. So how are we going to do it? Well, part of the solution is enhancing the Australian digital economy. IBISWorld has forecast that Australia can return to our longer-term average productivity growth by 2020 by harnessing ICT and high-speed broadband. And research from the OECD reported that ICT has already contributed over 50% of Australia's labour productivity growth over the past decade. One of the basic things is high-speed broadband infrastructure, and the Australian government is building a national broadband network to deliver broadband to every Australian home. The government's goal is for every household and business to have access to broadband with download speeds of between 25 and 100 megabits per second by late 2016. In this broader context, the new government recognises the enormous potential of cloud computing when combined with high-speed broadband. So I don't think I need to tell an audience at this event why cloud is important, but we certainly know that economic growth in service and knowledge-based economies is increasingly being driven by new digitally enabled business models. There's an expanding body of research linking the adoption of cloud computing with economic growth, both at the macro level and also at the firm level. And you can see some examples there. Research undertaken by KPMG in Australia suggests that the widespread adoption of cloud services could yield benefits, and they're actually minimum benefits of 3.3 billion a year to the Australian economy. EU studies have demonstrated that cloud computing shows that if member companies successfully adopted public cloud, it would boost GDP and create 2.5 million jobs by 2020. And I'm sure that in your own countries you've had similar sorts of research undertaken. What we're starting to see is quite strong global evidence that the adoption of cloud makes a huge difference both to firms and equally to national economies. So from a policy perspective, there are good reasons for government to take notice. So it was in this context that the government has recognised the central role of the digital economy. Some of you will be aware that Australia recently had elections, and with this came a change of government. The new government's e-government and digital economy policy outlines key actions that the government will pursue. In the policy, the government has outlined an ambitious agenda for improving the use of technology in the public sector and to ensure ICT investments are efficient and deliver measurable improvements to services provided to everyday Australians. To progress its reform agenda, the government has outlined a number of key initiatives. Firstly, the government has said that it will adopt a more aggressive use of cloud services to achieve better value for money, as well as better services for citizens. Whilst we're still working out through how this will be implemented, the new Communications Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, has signalled his intention to pursue a more aggressive cloud-first policy. The Minister has outlined his desire to give government agencies, and I quote, a push to overcome their natural box-hugging tendencies and desire to maintain their own internal IT infrastructure. And what he means by that is that he's noticed a tendency for CIOs in government agencies to want to hang on to their past solutions and to find good reasons why they should not necessarily be adopting cloud computing just now. There's a strong message from CIOs in Australia that cloud is a good idea, we'll get to it a bit later, rather than doing anything about it today. I've heard that from many of them. So to leverage best practice from the business sector, the new government's going to establish an ICT advisory board to obtain advice from private sector leaders and experts on the productivity gains available from ICT. The government will also undertake an audit across all agencies of spending and outcomes generated by ICT investment over the past 3 years. One objective of these audits is to identify duplication in systems across the public sector, which in turn could be consolidated and delivered through shared cloud services to achieve cost savings. And we've just heard a little of how our Indonesian colleagues are adopting similar approaches in their government. Naturally, with increased expectations about the use of cloud services in government, there is increasing discussion about information security and risks. So how should we frame risk? I mentioned earlier that agencies had reported some practical difficulties in adopting cloud services. In particular, smaller agencies had reported that they did not feel comfortable in adopting cloud services. In other words, they did not have sufficient tools to be able to manage risk and feel confident in making a decision to adopt cloud. And here I think we have some echoes of what we heard from Dr. Lee's presentation a little earlier. And this is a topic of discussion highly relevant to our gathering here today. How can we think about cloud services in a way that enables us to make good decisions and manage risks? This brings me to an important phenomenon. It is often about trade-offs and understanding how the overall benefits weigh up the overall risks. This type of approach will support better decision-making and encourage clearer thinking about what value we attach to different categories of government information. A risk-based approach to information security management is progressive in recognising that government data is not a homogeneous entity and that different deployments of cloud, public, community and private, will be suitable for different categories of government information. For example, public-facing websites of testing and development platforms are well suited to public cloud services, whereas security classified information would sensibly be stored onshore in secure and controlled environments. So just in terms of what we're doing, the government has identified small business and the not-for-profit organisations as having the greatest potential to benefit from the adoption of cloud services. And I should say that there's been a very rapid adoption of cloud services by big business in Australia, and we do not think that from a government perspective we need to tell big business very much at all about cloud. But there is clearly a lot of potential for small business. The new government is committed to supporting small business productivity and digital engagement in what is now a globally competitive environment. The potential benefits are significant. A survey of 1,000 small businesses in Australia reported that those ones that use cloud were 106% more likely to experience revenue growth than those who are not using cloud. In Australia, the hesitation of some small business to make use of cloud computing is largely an issue of confidence and knowledge. For example, a recent survey identified that the two key reasons for not using cloud were that they did not have enough information to make a business decision, and secondly, that they lacked confidence. So again, we can hear some echoes of some of the earlier presentations. For these smaller organisations, cloud offers enormous opportunity. In essence, cloud reduces the barriers to technology adoption, which has the potential to boost productivity and innovation. To help promote more confidence in small businesses, the government will be enhancing a number of its existing programs to provide better information and advice to small business and not-for-profit organisations on taking advantage of cloud services. Fundamentally, these initiatives are not about selling cloud as a solution to every problem, Rather, they're about promoting a better understanding of cloud services to enable small business to make sensible decisions about what ICT solutions best meet their business needs. Now, sorry, beg your pardon. In early 2013, the National Standing Committee on Cloud Computing, which I'm honoured to be the chair of, proposed the development of a cloud consumer protocol to encourage better information disclosure and transparency by cloud providers about their products and services. The idea for this actually came from some of the vendor members of the Standing Committee. It was proposed it be voluntary and developed by business. The Australian Computer Society recently held a series of workshops and took submissions and had over 400 attendees involved in this process. It was an interesting process to go through because at the end of it we discovered that most of the vendors, even though they'd proposed the idea in the first place, hated the idea of a protocol and saw it as a form of creeping regulation, whereas many small businesses and most consumer groups thought the protocol was a wonderful idea. So we're currently in the process of trying to make sense of all that, but I have to say that we're very interested in the Singaporean announcement earlier today about the MTCS, because I think we're now at a point where we're looking around for some alternate models of things we might use to promote confidence without frightening the vendors into thinking we're trying to regulate them. So it's an interesting time to be considering some of these cloud policy issues, is it not? Anyway, the Australian Computer Society is in the process of finalising a report to try and make sense of that process. We're also undertaking some other actions to promote a vibrant cloud sector in Australia. The government wants Australia to be a good place to host, provide and create cloud services, and in many ways it already is. We have a strong rule of law, skilled ICT professions and well thought out regulation and a growing economy. It was interesting talking to Dr. Lee a moment ago about our experience over the last 4 or 5 years of dealing with the development of cloud, and it appears that both Singapore and Australia were told the same story by multinational companies about 5 years ago, and that was that neither of our countries would ever be major hosts of data centres because that would all be done from the United States and Europe. Well, history shows that both Singapore and Australia have very vibrant, burgeoning data centre industries that have come into being over the last few years. So it's interesting how things change quickly. We're also looking at the regulatory environment. I won't dwell on that other than to say that we're trying to encourage greater knowledge and information about the good parts of regulation, but the new government has also a very strong deregulatory focus, and we believe that they see reducing the regulatory burden on industry as an important element of their future approach. So I'm going to conclude there. One of the things which we are interested in exploring further, and I will certainly be talking to my Singapore colleagues about, is the use of standards to support some of the things which we've been trying to achieve through the protocol. And we have indeed been working quite closely with Standards Australia through the JCC1 SC38 Advisory Committee process, and I think we'll continue to do so. I hope I've been able to provide you with some insights into the Australian government's approach to cloud computing. Ultimately, we're seeking to boost innovation and productivity in Australia, and we see 3 critical areas of focus. The use of cloud in government, and I think it's fair to say that the new government is going to put a great deal of emphasis on that for the future. The use of cloud by SMEs and small organisations. There's about 2.5 million SMEs in Australia. Only about 300,000 of them are currently using cloud services, so we think there is very great potential to transform the profitability and competitiveness of many of those small companies. And finally, the development of the Australian cloud industry and promoting foreign investment. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.